Hello, welcome to another edition of Dr. Bickmore's Why Wednesday interview sessions. And today my guest is Varian Johnson. And Varian and I have known each other for, I would say, about 7 or 8 years now, where we met at an Allen workshop. And
that's right.
And I've got to tell the story right off the bat. You know, I didn't know Varian 2 or 3 years before that. And I asked Jacqueline Woodson in a conversation, I said, who should I know that I don't know? Right. And this was going back, probably a decade now. And she said, Varian Johnson and Jason Reynolds. And at the time, I think Jason only had one book. I think he had the one book out. This was a decade ago. Lots happened in a decade, right? And I said, okay, I'm gonna buy the books. And I think I surprised you once that I'm one of the only people that still has a copy of one of the red polka dot.
Yeah. That's a hard book to find.
Yeah. So I have this book too. Yeah. You know, and I've been a fan ever since. I've been watching Varian's work, and then after Jackie said that, and I read a couple of things, I had a chance to meet you at an Allen workshop and sit in on a kind of moderated discussion.
Yeah.
So. First of all, Varian, I have been worried about all my colleagues and all the authors about how has your world changed during this COVID time? What have you found that you've had to do differently in your work or with your family? How have you held up?
Yeah, it's been different and a little difficult, certainly at the beginning. I have 2 young daughters. They're 7 and 10, and as soon as everything started shutting down, they came home, and I switched from being a writer who wrote most of the day to a writer who wrote sometimes, and kind of being a primary school teacher, certainly at least for those first 3 months as we finished the school year. Oh my gosh, and at the end of 2020, and then in 2021 to the 2020 to 2021 school year, my girls were still at home. So things were structured a little bit better. So I didn't have to be there all the time, but I was still the one kind of they came to when they had questions. And, for me as a writer, it's hard to get into the flow of writing something and then be interrupted kind of every 15, 30 minutes. I really need a good solid chunk of time. So really my writing, I don't want to say my writing suffered. I don't know if that's the right word, but it became less of a priority. For sure, and deadlines and things slid. I will say all my publishers, Scholastic, my main publisher, but I work with other publishers as well. They were all very understanding and accommodating for that. But for sure, it was a little tricky. Yeah.
Yeah, I think academics are exactly that way as well. Some of us found that we'd have spurts of where we could work really hard, and then where we couldn't, and a lot more people did early morning or late night work because they were accommodating children. Some of us, we're empty nesters right now. And my wife is also an academic, but we worried about our kids and grandkids and colleagues. All of a sudden I was advocating for colleagues in some ways. You're asking them to do things online and meetings at a pace that maybe isn't commensurate with the pressures that are felt on them. So it's been a change. So you talked about that, that your writing probably didn't suffer. And I can tell you that if you wrote the bulk of Playing Cards While You're Dealt, it didn't suffer.
Thank you.
But your workload might have changed. So tell us a little bit about who Varian is as a writer. How do you go about the creative process? You hear voices, do you see visions, you just plot it out, What's your game plan?
Well, I'm a big plotter, but first, before that, I usually have an idea in my mind of kind of, in general, what I want to write a book about. Playing the Cards You Dealt, I knew I wanted to write a book about the game of spades, right? Yeah. So that was kind of there at first, and then other things started happening with it. The Parker Inheritance, I knew I wanted to write a puzzle mystery, so I had that puzzle mystery first. But I do lots of outlining, and I will revise this outline a number of times, and it gets very long and very elaborate before I actually start the writing process. And then I start writing, and I write about 3 or 4 chapters, and I stop and say, okay, is this a novel that I can write or that I want to write? And if those are both yes, then I go back to my outline, revise it again, and then I start work on it. For me, the hardest part is writing that first draft. I hate the process of writing first drafts. They are slow. I second guess myself a lot. I change my outline as I'm writing it. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say sometimes. I have a vague notion of it. Maybe it's more of the subconscious what I'm trying to say. But then when I finish it and I start revision, to me, that's where the magic begins. Because now I have a full picture and I can start revising it for my intended audience, for that universal reader, whatever the case, and I can shape the novel a little bit more and bring some themes to light and subdue and cut other themes and other topics and things. To me, that's my favorite part, but it's a long process. I go through multiple drafts for all of my novels.
Yeah. When you mentioned that you like big chunks of time, so when do you do that? You get up first thing in the morning and try to do it? And when you say a block of time, is that 4 hours? Are you Hemingway, where you write 3 hours and you fish the rest of the day? Or, what is a block of time look like for you?
4 hours is a really good chunk of time. And kind of what I've settled on now, when my daughters, they go to school, I take them to school, I come back home, and I'm back at home by 7:45, let's say. But somewhere between 8 and 9, I start that block, and I try to really keep that 4 hours of writing. I'll take a stop. I'll stop and look at my email to see if there's anything that's urgent that has to be answered or anything like that. I may pop on, Twitter or Facebook for a 10 or 15 minute break in between there. I think taking breaks is important.
Yeah.
But I really try to protect that writing time. And then in the afternoon, it's all the business stuff that comes to writing. Sometimes it's, washing dishes around the house, running errands, getting ready to pick up the girls. There are lots of kind of life things and business type things that happen there. But I really try to protect the writing time for the morning, because I think that's where I'm my freshest. That being said, the deadlines make you do crazy things, and the pandemic has had me doing crazy things. So I've been staying up a lot later. I've been getting up earlier sometimes too. Yesterday I was up till about 3:30 working on the book, because I was kind of feeling it, and sometimes you got to grab hold of that inspiration when it's there. The goal is to get words down on the page. However that happens is whatever I try to suit my schedule to.
So you came to this, with another career. You'd done some other work. So how did you feed both masters for a while? When did that happen?
So yeah, I have a degree in civil engineering. I still am a licensed engineer. That's my Texas engineering license up there. When I was in college, majoring in civil engineering, I started writing, right? And I wrote most of that first book, Red Polka Dot and the World Full of Plaid, in college, and revised it afterwards. But when I was doing both, I would get up really early in the morning. I would get up about 4:45 and write for about an hour and a half, go to work, and then I would write during lunch, maybe 45 minutes during my lunch break. And that kind of built up and added up over time. And I love doing both. I mean, I miss engineering. I miss doing it day to day.
Yeah.
I miss those paychecks every 2 weeks. But books started to pick up and do really, really well. I wrote a book called The Great Green Heist, which is down there. I'm not going to pick it up. The Great Green Heist, and then other books after that. And at some point I figured, well, if there was ever time to start to try to be a full-time writer, it's now. So about 16 years after I started engineering, I left that job and started writing full-time. Although, again, I mean, I tell folks I write full-time, but it's not just writing. It's a collage of things. I do writing, I do some teaching, I do speaking. I do lots of little things to kind of make it all work.
Yeah, if you're gonna be the full-time writer, there's other things associated with it, right? That come in, and that's one of the things I know has been really hard for some writers, because some have built a good network of visiting certain schools, and when that went away, the economic hardship for many was real, right? To do that, and that's so I'm really interested. Do you have a community of a writing group? Did you maintain a writing group during this time, or were you kind of in isolation doing this?
At first, very much in isolation. I will say I have a number of, I went to Vermont College of Fine Arts and I have an MFA there.
Yeah.
And I also do some teaching there now. And there's a number of us who do a retreat every year who graduated from the program. And we weren't able to do our retreat last year, but one of us had the idea, well, let's start doing these writing rooms in Zoom. So they would open up Zoom and we'd all kind of be there and we look at each other and we write. And then we kind of take a break for 10 minutes and talk, and then we write. I actually found that didn't work very well for me. My schedule was so wishy-washy with the girls and everything that I couldn't consistently do it. But we'll also do a good job of checking in on each other and seeing how everything was, even if we weren't kind of seeing each other in person. Also, I live in the Austin, Texas area, and Austin has a really strong writing community as well too. So we did lots of virtual things and tried to keep in touch online more, which was really beneficial. I think the pandemic was hard on everyone and in different ways. You did mention, income from speaking events and school visits. I was lucky that there was money I was planning on coming in for school visits that didn't come. I was lucky that other books did well enough that it worked out for me for that year. But it was really scary there for a while, and scary for a lot of folks. Even now, I think as things are starting to pick back up, balancing when can I do school visits, when will schools be open for that? Do I feel safe doing it? Is it the right thing to do? I think those are all things we wrestle with a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I think I'm in the Las Vegas area and large school district, and there's been a lot of difficulty coming back and fatigue. Teachers are fatigued, and whether or not there's been funds, even from schools that have donors or people around them that make that possible, that's been slower to come back, right? Yeah. And we're aware of that, and are trying to do what we can to make that space. Well, also that, as I love the voice that you create. I don't play spades, but I'm a pretty good hearts player. We've done that. My wife and I sometimes over the pandemic have become better at gin rummy, two-handed gin rummy, right? But I love the notion and the story about spades. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your history with spades and where you came to playing the cards you're dealt?
Sure.
Because I just love that premise, right?
Thank you. Spades, at least in the communities I grew up in, it's a big African-American tradition. There's always a spades game going on, at family events, cookouts, church events sometimes. No matter what, there's always a spades game going. Someone always has a deck of cards. And it's kind of a community building event, these spades games, the spades tournament. And spades is a game. It's a trick winning game. So you're trying to win the most number of tricks or books in the per hand. And you play with a partner 2-on-2, but you have to bid the number of books that you think you're going to win, which is part of it. You bid with your partner. So that's a part of it, part of the strategy of it, thinking how many you'll win, what other people have in their hands, how they may play them. But then, trash talk is a big part of the game too. It's always a bit of nice, friendly boasting.
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes not so friendly. And I grew up with all of that. My father taught me and my brother how to play games he grew up with. Spades. There's a game called Bid Whist, which is even more complicated than spades. There's Tonk, a game that kind of we grew up with in the neighborhood. Obviously, gin rummy and things like that too. Yeah. And so, we played over the years, and my brother and I got to be really good at it. At least we thought we were really, really good. But what I loved about spades is that no matter your socioeconomic status, where you live, where you come from, we're all equals when we sit down at the card table, right? And we can all kind of talk the same trash, but we can get up and be friendly and build bonds as well too. It feels to be a community building event, even with those little bits of trash talk. As long as they don't go too far, it's just a great way to build community and camaraderie with other folks.
Yeah, and not to give anything away about the book, but that trash talk is an issue, right? In the book, yes. One of the things that's debated back and forth about kind of what's healthy and what isn't. And I there might be people out there that didn't grow up playing with face cards, but Rook has similar games, is a trick taking game, I think the community of people, certainly in our generation, there was a lot more card playing before I think the online role playing games and video games taking place. And I think that there's still a place for you, like you said, for families and neighborhoods to kind of get together. And like you say, somebody's got a card table under a tree at a picnic, right?
Yeah.
All of a sudden that breaks out. And sometimes my wife and I have been known to take a deck of cards and just go to the park for a couple of hours, right? And be outside and play there. So that's great. You also talked about, and I don't know if you did any research on this, how prevalent do you really think it is in an African American community or neighborhood versus others? And is there a way that spades took on that other games didn't? Do you have any sense of that, or is that another research project?
I did some research on it. I did some, and I found different things, and they're all kind of contradict. Some folks say spades was kind of built up in through the military and through Black soldiers playing it and then bringing it back home. That I don't know if that's true or not. For me in my community, it's just something that was always there. It was something my father played. His parents played it before then. These community kind of, again, building games, and it's something that space is it's not a super complicated game. There are games that are more complicated for sure. Bridge is very complicated to me, I would say, but it's complicated enough where you feel like there is some strategy involved. It's not just the luck of the draw, which I like, and which I think a lot of people like as well too. And it's an easy game to play. You just, you can have a deck of cards just in your pocket all the time and pull them out and then start playing. It's something that I found that as I moved and lived and traveled in different areas, even though I grew up in the South, the game of space was still predominant and prevalent in African American communities. I grew up in South Carolina, but I went to college at the University of Oklahoma. And when I went to the University of Oklahoma, everyone played space. And certainly most of the Black kids who hung out like in the lounge downstairs at night, we played lots of spades, we played lots of dominoes, and they were from all over the place, all over the country. And their rules were a little bit different, with how they played. There's all these different variations, but the basic premise of it was the same. The trash talk was the same. So it felt like you're kind of going into this built community, even though we're coming from different places.
Well, I've been on a streak where the last several books I've read over the last few weeks have all been really good. And I don't know if I'm fortunate that I'm on the right mailing list or people are giving me the idea, but this is a book, if you're teaching middle grades or kids that are wondering how to build community or relationships with others, I think the messages about friendship and family are just really timely in terms of this book. I really, and I'd heard about it and I'd seen the cover come out, and then when I got the copy, I went, oh, it went above my expectations, and I've, with Parker Inheritance and others, I've come to expect good things from you as you do that. Now, are you going to genre jump now? Or are you going to do a mystery and then a card book, and then are you going to do a superhero book? And what do you have planned, or what's in the future? Because I think you've grabbed some really good ground with sophisticated middle grades books.
Yeah,
no question. I think these two alone would give you a lot of territory with the Parker Inheritance and playing the cards you're dealt. But what are your plans?
The great thing I feel like about being an author is that I can kind of make it up as I go along and find the book that best suits me and kind of what I want to work on. So I will say I love middle grade. Like, realistic middle grade is just really my heart, and I will always come back to that, certainly right now after kind of finding my foothold. I do miss YA though. You spoke about superheroes. I do have a superhero graphic novel coming out next year with DC Comics about a character named Mr. Miracle. He's an escape artist. He was created by Jack Kirby. So I'm working with Daniel Isles, a British illustrator, and we created this book called Mr. Miracle: The Great Escape, which is all set on this different world, and we think it's really, really fun. But it also touches on issues with race. It also touches on issues with panic attacks, for lack of a better word, seizing your destiny. What are you destined for? How you found families as well too. Lots of things packed into that book, and that will come out in January of next year, January 2022. And then after that, I'm not sure. I've got a couple of other middle grades coming. I've got an idea for a YA prose novel kind of percolating in the back of my head. I think I've got a couple of other books before I get to that, and maybe some picture books too. I want to kind of do the full range. Maybe I even do like adult novels one day. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Right? It's I think that and this is the time we can let the cat out of the bag. You're going to be one of our featured keynotes this summer in June 2021. And we're going to try to focus on middle grades for the primary thing, because we haven't done that, right? Awesome. And I think middle grades are that sweet spot in which when I first started doing YA 15, 18 years ago, people didn't talk about the middle grades compartment. They talk about children's literature, YA. Some people argue that I was ignorant and didn't know that middle grades existed, but I think there's been a real concern with a push over the last 10 years to really focus. But you get upper elementary kids who can read up because they're reading well and they need that interest. And I think there's room for quick middle reads in high school.
Yeah. For
all of a sudden, if kids are giving more choice, let them read. There's nothing magical about the age level of the book. It's what kind of thinking a kid might do about a book. And so if I were to take, again, playing the cards you're dealt, and you wanted kids to understand character, you've got it. If you want kids to understand parental dynamics and how minor characters influence major characters, you've got it, right? If you want the kind of community tension, you've got it. So I wouldn't have any problem if I wanted to let kids choose a middle grades book that's of high literary quality, and let them read it and then ask them the same questions. I tell researchers, teachers this, I say, what's magic about the classics, right? Are you going to ask a different question than what's the plot, what's the theme, what's the character, what's the setting?
Yeah.
We can ask that about a lot of things and get the same accomplishment. So I'm happy to hear that you're focusing on middle grades, because that just is exciting to me, see how sophisticated the field has come.
Yeah.
Especially with some of the graphic novels in that age range as well. So you also mentioned that, in your superhero book, and you and I have talked briefly about this before, but the idea of inclusion, or we need diverse books, talking about race, especially when we have people trying to make rules in your state and my state and other states about things that they seemingly don't understand.
Yeah.
What has kind of been your history with the whole we need diverse books? How do you see your role in that? What conversations have you had with that?
I think it's a movement that we all need to be part of, certainly in different ways, right? Depending on our job and our comfort level with certain things, but there's something we can all champion. Even I often tell people, even the books that you suggest, that you say, hey, have you read this book? Instead of going with a book that features an all-white cast, let's switch it up and show a different world, a different character, a different community, a different situation. With me, I was really fortunate to partner with Paula Chase, Don Tate, Kelly Starling Lyons, and many others now when we formed the Brown Bookshelf. We formed the Brown Bookshelf a little bit prior to the We Need Diverse Books kind of becoming into the world. But our idea was we wanted to showcase and highlight books written by or illustrated by Black authors. And we have something called 28 Days Later in February, where we highlight authors, creators, let me say, every day of the month. Some are kind of our vanguard folks you have heard about, and some are new folks that you haven't heard about yet. You mentioned Jason Reynolds. I remember Jason's agent emailing me saying, hey, my client has a new book coming out. We would really love for him, if possible, to be showcased on 28 Days Later. And I looked up and said, "Oh yeah, no, this sounds great. This sounds like a wonderful author." And we had a back and forth interview, and that was, that was before Jason Reynolds was Jason Reynolds. And
Yeah. I
kind of,
have several before Jason Reynolds with Jason Reynolds stories, right?
yes.
And that's what we're having now. I mean,
Yeah.
some people are looking at your work and saying, "Oh, Varian Johnson." They don't realize how long you've kind of been around, and I think in some ways, the Parker and Heritage just really
Sure.
did some really good work for you. And again, people can't expect writers to write that great novel right out of the can, right?
Sure.
And as a critic, because I'm clearly a critic, right? I'm a scholar as a critic in that, but I think that one of the things that I'm always interested in, I get a lot of new novels, the first novel, and some are great, but I'm always interested in the second and the third novel.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean it has to be significantly better, but is it in the range that shows me this is a writer who's writing kind of as a craft and doing that kind of work? So I'm really interested in that. And for example, I'll give you another example is Tiffany Jackson, who I think is wonderful. Allegedly didn't splash very big. A lot of us didn't get it. A lot of us, and when I got in my hands, Monday's Not Coming, I first thought it was a new novel, right? It was the first novel. And I was talking with the publisher. I said, this is certainly get a lot of play. Is this the first novel? She said, no, she has another one. And I said, I didn't hear that. I didn't know that. And, we were talking at a conference. And so she gave me the name and I got that allegedly. And I went, oh, why didn't I get allegedly? It's not that I wasn't around, right? But it didn't happen. And when I read allegedly, I thought, oh, and then because I'd read Monday really quickly, I thought, oh, this is somebody who shows their craftsmanship and continuing to show that, right? If we follow that. And I think that's clear in yours early on. I look at some of your early work when I found out about you, and there's easy for the critic to see that there's a craftsman at work, that you're a writer, that you're growing and learning things. And so it's very exciting to do that. But we could make the case, Shanisha Clark and we've been on a project now that the pandemic slowed us down. We have 3 volumes that take on the history of African-American writers of young adult literature in the 60s to the 80s. And you can guess that there just aren't many people that were championed. And there's really 4 names. And it's Virginia Hamilton, it's Julius Lester, Walter Dean Myers, and Mildred Taylor, right? And so we wrote an edited book where we had people write 2 chapters about each of those, an early book and a later book, and then we did the second volume, which is due out in January. Okay, finally, awesome. We cover the 80s to 2000, but and those names are easy for people to come up with. You can do the 8 we chose, and based on their awards and their Jacqueline Woodson, Angela Johnson, Nikki Grimes, Sharon Draper, Christopher Paul Curtis, Sharon Flake, Rita Williams Garcia, and Jewel Parker Rhodes. And it's difficult to find people who wrote much in that period before. And Shanice and I claim in our introduction, it's not that African-American writers weren't writing, but they weren't being recognized or taken up or promoted. And so when you look historically back on those 2 decades, they're still relying on those founding fathers and mothers, right, who they're publishing, and then the others. Now, when we started this 4 years ago, some of the people who are making the splash now had not published a book. And our 3rd volume, and I'll give away the secret, Andrea Davis Pinkey, Co Booth, Sheila P. Moses, Kwame Alexander, Kekla Magoon, Jason Reynolds, Varian Johnson, Renee Watson, Tiffany Jackson we've added, Lamar Giles, and Danita Okorafor, who's the science fiction writer. Now, could we add 4 or 5 more names? Probably, right? So we argue maybe there needs to be, but something's happened in the last 10 years that has been beneficial for African-American authors that 5 years ago, when Shanice and I dreamed of this project, was not happening. People were not being recognized. And a lot of scholars, I mentioned those lists, and somebody will watch this and say, well, what about,
Exactly. Sure,
right?
sure.
And I say, yeah, what about? Isn't that wonderful that now we have that discussion that we couldn't have from 1960 to 1980,
Yeah.
that we couldn't have when we look back about 80 to 2000, but now we have something. Now, does that mean we've reached a peak where things are equal? No, not even close. In fact, the renaissance of that, and as well as Latinx authors
Mhm.
and Asian American authors of all different kinds. I think of Randy Rabay's, patron saints of nothing with the Filipino
Yeah.
population. We have things happening, but I think in some ways it's up to the gatekeepers, and I'm one of those, somebody who teaches young adult lit classes. What do my classes look like?
Sure.
And publishers are gatekeepers, you know? So how many scholars of color are doing what I'm doing?
Yeah.
Not enough,
Yeah.
right? And how many people in the publishing world are people of color who are doing that work? So I think we have right now where we can point to people like you and say, yeah, we have writers, but I don't know that the promotion is gone. Now, you guys feel that pressure when you get together and talk and write, or what does it feel like? Does it feel like there's something happening, or do we still need more advocacy from the Brown Bookshelf and we need diverse books?
I mean, yes and yes. I mean, I think we are much better than we were 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, but more work still needs to be done. Um, and it's hard being a creative of color in this world. It's hard being a person of color in this industry and figuring out what battles can you win, and being sometimes the only person in the acquisitions meeting and trying to advocate for a book and saying why this is valid and why this works, and or why this book should not be published, or we should not champion this book for these other reasons, and being drowned and constantly being pounded on. I think change feels small sometimes, but it can be very, very big. And I think sometimes those outside of us feel very impatient because we want things to change quickly. And they are, but sometimes we are trying to re-steer ships that have been kind of on the same path and have this same inertia for so long. But we got to still keep pushing at it. And again, I tell everyone has an opportunity to make a difference with bringing more diverse books into the world, into knowledge, from the books you're suggesting that your kids read, that you pick up from the library, to what you're suggesting for teachers, from the gifts you buy, right? From what you retweet, I teach at the Vermont College of Fine Arts, and one of my students have to read a certain number of books every semester. And out of those books, once per month, I say 2 books have to be written by a marginalized author. 2 books out of, say, 10 or 11 or 12, which is a really, really low bar. I've had colleagues who said all of the books must be written by an author of color, or some will say all the books have to be written by women. And I think, and like, no one ever says, oh, there's not enough books. There are plenty. They're just books we haven't found yet.
Yeah.
And so we got to do a better job of trying to find those books. And it's hard because there's so many books out there in the world. Tiffany's a great example of that. I'm so glad that she got those accolades for Monday's Not Coming. So it will go back to Allegedly as well too, and kind of raise her career. And I'll also say one last thing. I think we're all trying to be better with what we write. I was very fortunate that Parker landed, and now I worked really hard on the book. Don't get me wrong. I worked really, really hard. But I was also fortunate that the reception was really, really great for it as well too. And the reception seems to be pretty good for the new book. Well, you never know. We'll see. My goal is to write the best book possible. And that may look different from book to book. And success may look a little different. But if I'm writing the best book I can, hopefully that comes through in some type of way. And I think most of us are trying to write the best book possible, trying to write the best book that we can write. And hopefully readers will see that in the work and enjoy it for what the book is. And we'll see as more of us get published.
Yeah, I think it's an ongoing challenge, and it's like you say, it would be very easy for me to pick a young adult lit class, and in a semester I have them read 25 to 30 books, which some people think is a lot, and some people think it's not enough, but it you know, in with the George Floyd incident and that I rewrote my syllabus. I did the only person cis white person I had was Joe Knowles, because she was one of our keynotes at our summit. So 25 books, and I just said no. I'm in one of the most diverse colleges in the country. I'm in a city that's diverse, and people can find the other books and we can book talk them along the way. But I'm going to use this occasion to teach authors and books that have been more often than not ignored, right? And that doesn't mean that I didn't have some award winners among those, right? They are, but I took that opportunity to be loud in a way that I could, right? In that way. And I think we need, frankly, we need more of that risk, right? And I'm always, I look at and I study what other people put in their syllabi, and I'm always amazed at how similar they look, most of them, to 20 years ago, right? We still have not embraced that full change. And it's not that they aren't doing some, but probably not enough. So I'm advocating, read more, read widely, read something you haven't read before, you know, look at the Kirkus review and maybe add some books that are risky. You know, they're getting a good review, but you haven't read it, read it with your students, make a decision when you come. You know, it doesn't have to be that you vet everything in the world, like the teacher is the sole vetter of everything. Maybe you explore something together, right? And I think that can come and make a really great place in the world. Well, it's been wonderful to talk with you, and we look forward to talking with you more as the book gets play and we make plans for the summit. And it's been fabulous to get to see you again and know that you're doing fine and you're out there in the world and doing that stuff. So I would ask you kind of the same question that I ask a lot of people to end. If you could have lunch with an author or two or three, live or past, who would you love to have a lunchtime conversation with? Which author would you love to take some time with? And it's spur of the moment. I never give anybody any time to think about this.
I think a couple of folks. I do think I never had a chance to meet Virginia Hamilton before she passed away, and to just she. I mean, you mentioned those four authors, and I've read all of them. But growing up, Walter D. Myers and Virginia Hamilton were my authors. Those were the two who I looked to, and I had a chance to talk to Walter only a couple of times. I never had a chance to meet Virginia Hamilton. I would love to sit down with Walter and Virginia and to chat with them. You know, gosh, at this point, yes, they've all Mildred BTL has not passed, but she's older. She's doing less and less events. I had a chance to have a great conversation with Julius Lester a few years before he passed. I would pick all four of those authors. I really would.
Wouldn't that be a great lineup for a conference, right?
Oh, that would be magnificent.
We're bringing Varian and these four authors.
Varian could hold their water for them. Is about all I could do for those four.
I would love, giants. You know, but you and there's some others who I think are true bridges to those people. I mean, and I think Jackie's right when she says that you and Jason are bridges between those people in ways that you don't get enough credit for, I think, you know, and we also, at the same time, Christopher Paul Curtis, you know, we don't include him in the conversation. As soon as you bring up his name, no one will question that he's not a great writer and a profound influence in the field, right? But I've met him a couple of times, and he's a large man, but he's so kind and gentle and quiet, right? You think, but I think that there are more opportunities where we need to hear from the people and talk how important it was that Walter Dean Myers and Virginia Hamilton were your writers. Well, you know, we have another generation who has more people to choose from than you did, right? You know, and we can mark that as progress to some degree, but they have to be in the libraries. They can't be kicking new kid out of the library.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
know exactly.
some of those things, and I think they have to be there and they have to be talked to, and that's what we hope our series does. It'll catalog those, and we use a book by each person as a model, that whoever's writing that chapter, of how you can use that book in the classroom with engaging activities for kids. And we hope that school libraries will get these books and go, like I wrote the chapter on Julius Lester, about the slave narratives. We were slaves, which
Yes.
I didn't realize how early he wrote that, and what research and profound work he had to do to make that book available, and largely absolutely ignored by publishers and teaching communities. And here's somebody who's teaching teachers and kids how to use archives and stories that were told and cataloged in the 30s by people who were slaves, several generations before
Yes.
some of them passed. And Julius Lester was doing remarkable work with that, right? And
Exactly.
and we think, why can't a book like that be rediscovered and reused in a classroom, right? As we have these things.
Yeah.
But it's great to talk with you. And we'll post this interview in a couple of weeks, and we hope that more people are engaged in reading Playing the Cards You're Dealt, because it's out and available. You can get it at your favorite local bookstore. I'm sure